So as we begin to move from the idea of what we read in the book to the idea of where we are with our leadership and talking about our leadership, priorities is where we're going to be looking as we begin. You'll remember we began right before the break for Thanksgiving. We were talking about a number of different areas that are a part of our leadership, how we define our leadership. We've talked about preparation and some other areas. Well, as we continue to talk about how we define our leadership, well, priorities are a part of that. Now, what I'd like for you to do is take your Bibles for just a moment, and I want you to open up to the book of 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 4, and obviously you are going to be familiar with the text of the first 8 verses. Primarily, we tend to focus on the idea of preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. See, we're talking about time, and we're talking about a priority in the way that we use our time. But I want you to notice 3 specific ideas that are expressed here in these first 8 verses. When you begin in verse 1 and you begin reading down through the text, and you see the charge that Timothy is being given by Paul, notice that what he's trying to emphasize, and the idea that's being expressed here first, is the need for Timothy to stand up for the truth even when others do not. And he's charging him in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead. And he says, preach the word. Be ready in season, out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with great patience and instruction. Because the time is coming when they will not endure sound doctrine. And so what Paul's trying to emphasize to Timothy is look, you have to stand up for and you have to preach the truth even when others will not do so. And so when you think about this development of priorities in our life, what Paul is trying to tell Timothy is priority 1 is the need for you to preach and to stand up for the truth of God's word even when others don't, because the time is coming when they won't. And I'm sure that Timothy was living in that element at that time, but we are living out the fulfillment of these verses. We are living in a time when men do not want to hear the truth. But wanting to have their ears tickled, they'll accumulate to themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires. They've turned their ears away from the truth, and they've turned aside to myths or fables, stories. And so Paul's telling Timothy that first and foremost, you need to realize that the priority in your life is you stand up for and preach the truth even when others will not. But the second idea that stands out in this verse is the importance of remembering your responsibilities. As a leader, as a preacher in a congregation, you have responsibilities, and he outlines them here in verse 5. Very clearly, as he says, be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. And so he's outlining for Timothy very clearly the responsibilities that he needs to remember. And when you think about priorities and the way that you prioritize your life as a leader, then obviously there needs to be an understanding that you have this responsibility of standing up for the truth. But your responsibilities in ministry, to be alert, to be watchful, sober in all things. And then I find it interesting that as you look throughout 2 Timothy, there's a great deal of emphasis upon this idea of enduring hardship, suffering. Because when you go back into chapter 1, verse 8, he talks about suffering for the gospel. He says, join with me in suffering for the gospel. Then he identifies in verse 12 the fact that he suffers these things. Chapter 2, verse 3, he says, suffer hardship with me. In verse 8 and verse 9, he says, remember Jesus Christ, risen from the dead, descendant of David, according to my gospel, for which I suffer hardship, even to imprisonment as a criminal. The word of God is not in prison. Verse 12, he talks about if we endure, we will also reign with him. In chapter 3, he talks about persecutions in verse 11. Persecutions I endured. And then he says in verse 12, indeed, all who desire to live godly will be persecuted. You can't get away from this idea that we have to endure hardship. And then as you continue to look at the text, he talks about doing the work of an evangelist. What is the work of an evangelist? What is evangelism?
Spreading the gospel.
Spreading the gospel.
Sowing seed. Preaching the word.
Preach the word. We're going to be knocking doors this Saturday. It's a good opportunity for us to do the work.
Don't go to the village.
Fulfill your ministry.
Did you hear about that? That's where he did the newsletter campaign, and they wrote letters and said for him not to come back. They wrote several letters.
Well,
He was handing out with a ski mask on. I don't understand.
so Paul's telling Timothy, stand up for the truth even when others do not. And then he says, remember your responsibilities. Fulfill your ministry. But if there's one idea that stands out in this text that is probably as much as important as anything else, if not more so, is two very powerful words. Never quit. You see, it's easy when it gets difficult. I just believe with all my heart that the reason he emphasizes the need for him to endure hardship is because Paul knows that if you're going to be a minister of Jesus Christ, if you're going to be a servant of the Lord, you're going to have hardship in your life. You're going to have to endure it. You can't quit. Bless you.
Ooh, thank you.
But never quit. And notice how Paul says this. In verse 6, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Don't quit. You can't. Because if you quit, Satan wins. There are going to be times during the next year and a half you're in school that it's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. And you're going to be thinking, it'd just be easier to quit. That's just what Satan wants you to do. He wants you to quit. And the more he can work on you to get you to think that way, he's going to. Because the last thing he needs in the field is someone who's equipped to share the gospel with others. So share the word. Stand for the truth even when others do not. Remember your responsibilities. Never quit. Now to me, that's a threefold idea that really is powerful in regards to priorities. Because those are the way our priorities need to be outlined. Now, what I want us to look at for the next few minutes is what I call a priority chart. And you've probably heard, I don't know who's credited with originally saying this, but what is urgent is seldom important. And what is important is seldom urgent. Now, there are 4 quadrants up here. And as we go through each of these 4 quadrants, you're going to see a contrast in this idea of that which is urgent and that which is important. Because not only are we looking at, in category or quadrant 1, the urgent and important, but then in the second quadrant, we have those areas in our life that are not urgent, but they're important. And then the third quadrant involves those areas that are urgent, but they're not important. And then the final area, the final quadrant, is those specific areas that are not urgent and they're not really important. Now, going back to the first quadrant, the first category here, that which is urgent and that which is important. What kind of areas do you think fall under this quadrant? The idea of just our daily lives and the lives of people on a day-to-day basis. What is it that becomes urgent and it's important?
Somebody's on their deathbed.
Somebody's on their deathbed?
Somebody's salvation when they're sitting.
Sure. I had man, you talk about a challenging situation. One of the preachers that I know in Arkansas was telling me an account of And do not get me wrong, this man was busy. There wasn't a lazy bone in his body. But this guy called him, and he wanted to study the gospel. And this preacher did not get out there to go see him. And he died. And they asked him to preach the funeral. Can you imagine what it would have been like to have had been in that situation, knowing that he was calling, he was wanting to study, and if I'm not mistaken, maybe he was wanting to be baptized. I don't remember what it was, but the preacher couldn't get out there. And as a result, the guy died, and then he's doing the funeral. So, yeah, salvation, deathbeds, those are important, and those are urgent matters. What else would fall under this category?
Wife's about to give birth.
Giving birth to a child could be urgent, and it could be important. I think both of those would fit in that category. Nathan, your house is on fire. That'd probably be urgent and important.
Sir.
I mean, really, when you think about it, and there are several areas I'm going to list out here, but crises, when we see a crisis, we know that it's urgent and it's important. Now, the reason I'm going through these quadrants is because it has to do with the way we prioritize our time. That's kind of why I thought it was so interesting that the section of the book that we are particularly reading involves this idea of patience and time. Because if you're driving down the highway and you see a car overturn, what is your first thought? I need to stop and help, or I've got an appointment in 15 minutes and I cannot be late. You see, what becomes urgent and what is important in our life determines the way we prioritize our life. Crises is certainly one of those areas. Your house is on fire. Your wife's giving birth. Somebody's on their deathbed. Also, pressing problems are urgent and they're important. Now,
what would be the difference between a crisis and a pressing problem?
Well, there are some problems that are taking place in some of the extension schools.
Okay.
And they're urgent and they're important. It's not a crisis, but they're urgent and they need to be addressed. And they're important. Now, what I was about to say in connection to this is, generally speaking, when it's pressing problems, it's usually urgent and important for the one who is in that problem rather than the one who's trying to resolve the problem. I'll give you an example. I wired some money over to the school, the individual over the school in Chandigarh, India. I wired it October the 4th. And to this day, he still has not received it. Do you think that's a pressing and an urgent matter for him? That it's important that he gets that money that's now almost 2 months delayed in getting there? Probably. Is it as urgent and important to me? I'm trying to make it so. But do you think I'm going to lose sleep over the fact that I still have food on my table and I still have a car to drive? You see the difference? See, he's 10,000 miles away. Space, distance, location. What's urgent and important to one person may not be to the other, even though that pressing problem may exist. And so also you'll find in this category the idea of deadline-driven projects. Now, you guys especially feel this on matters that are urgent and they are important. When you know that there is a deadline on Turnitin and you have a project that is due, well, about 11:30, if you're just getting started, you probably didn't place as much importance and urgency to that as you should have. But you see what I'm saying? When you've got a deadline that's driven, I mean, it's a deadline-driven project, it has to be done on this day and at this time. It makes it urgent and it is important. You will experience that even more so when you are working in ministry. And then another area that falls into this is the idea of meetings or preparations. You're going to have various meetings that are going to be urgent. They are important because we're talking about whether you're going to continue to have employment with this congregation or not. you probably would want to be at that meeting. And I would say it's probably urgent and important. And so you guys can fill in a lot of different areas in regards to those categories, and there are other areas that we could list out all the time in regards to that. But I want us to talk about this second category. When it comes to areas that are not urgent, but they are important, well, prevention and planning. My house, I could prevent spending more money, and I could plan to save some money by doing a better job of some ecological upgrades and improvements on my house. It's not urgent. Is it important that I do that? Sure. It's an important thing. If I were to have better insulated windows, if I had insulation in my walls, that might help. But that would prevent some problems in the future. But that's not an urgent matter to me, or I would have already done it. I've been there 4 years. Is it important that it gets done? Yes. How about saving for the future? Do you see setting aside money to save for retirement as a matter that's important? Sure. You know what it felt like to sit down with an advisor and then say, you need to save about $1,800 a month until you're 65 if you're going to be able to retire with this kind of income. I'm like, it's not going to happen. First of all, I don't have $1,800 a month. But is that important to me? Sure. But is it urgent? No. It's not urgent. Another area that kind of fits into this category is exercise. I thought it was interesting. Doug kind of hammered on it both days. The idea of get out and take a walk. Even if it's just a walk for 30 minutes a day, get your heart rate up, do some exercise. How many of you do that regularly? How many of you see it as important? It's not urgent. Because we tend to think, I've got time. I'll do that later. I don't know how many times I could tell you that I've talked to younger people about the importance of not gaining weight and exercising, watching what you eat, and all those kind of things. And without exception, I mean, almost all of them said, I'll do that when I get a little older. You may not. Is it important to them? Sure. But is it urgent? Yeah. Yes.
Would you classify not urgent but important as the list of important things that we don't do if time's not?
Well,
like
could
we don't
be.
have so much time to do these things, these will be the ones that suffer.
Could be. You guys probably do that some with your schedule of assignments. This one's only worth 10 points. I'm not going to put as much time on that one. This one's more pressing. This one's urgent. So you guys probably do that with your assignments. Relationship building. Now, how much do you really place urgency upon building relationships? Now, we probably categorize those depending upon who the relationship is with. If it's a relationship with your wife, you might place that in a little higher category than you would with your neighbor who's lost. Is it important I reach him with the gospel? Yes. But is it an urgent matter to me? Probably not if I've been there 4 or 5 years and I've not ever said anything to him yet. Now that's convicting because that's convicting me. And so relationship building matters. We see them as important, but we really don't see them as urgent. We don't see the urgency behind them. And then a fourth area that falls into this is work-life balance. Is there a balance between your work and your life? Or is your work your life? And we're going to come back to this idea and talk more about it a little bit later in the class. But certainly, when it comes to having balance between our work and our life, it's important. But is it urgent? Are we willing to say no to certain projects that we need to be involved in doing, or that we don't need to be involved in doing, but we just can't? You guys get my leadership blog. You probably enjoy the one that I wrote today. I've already had several comments about it. But The idea is I'm probably the worst at saying no. I'll go home and say, I got a phone call today from a guy that wants me to come down to La Junta and do a leadership thing on a Saturday in January. She goes, did you tell him no? And I'll say, no, I didn't tell him no. Why is it that we struggle with that balance? Because it's important to us, but it's not urgent.
What Saturday in January, specifically?
Not when you're having a baby.
Okay.
The next quadrant that we find here when it comes to priorities has to do with matters that are urgent to us, but they're not important. There are going to be interruptions that happen in your life, and those interruptions become urgent, but they're not necessarily important. Man, you need to come here and see this. I want to show you this on my laptop. Well, that's urgent. I mean, he's telling you he wants you to come see it, and you'll stop what you're doing, you'll go in there and look at it. But is it really important? My wife will do stuff like I'll be working on something on the computer, and she'll say something like, I want you to come down here and take a look at what I've done in this room. I've been working on this room. Is it urgent? Yes. Get up from your chair and go. Was it important? No. Could it have waited a half hour? Probably. Huh?
It was important to her, though.
It was important to her, but to me, it was urgent because I know her. And that meant go. But was it important? I could care less what the room looks like. Do you like it? I love it. I mean, that's just the way I am.
And I think that there's a definite correlation between this and the crises, because it's important to the one doing the interruptions.
Very good. And that's right. To them, it's important. And they're not concerned about whether I've got a deadline on a paper that I've got to turn in that's 28 pages in length tomorrow. It's like, I want you to come look at this room. I've been working on it all day. Yes, ma'am. I will be right there. Distractions. Distractions also are matters that become urgent, but they're not necessarily important. Now, I don't know what it is that's going to distract you. Because what distracts you may not distract someone else. But I can't work sitting on the couch with the television on. I just can't. If I got my laptop in front of me, I may be doing a little bit of work. But if something comes up on the television, next thing you know, I'm distracted by it. Was it urgent? Well, it was at the time because I looked. Was it important? No, it was not important. But that happens. You're going to have various distractions. Your children are going to come up to you while you're trying to do work, and they're going to ask for something. They're going to pull on your pants. Now, you're sitting there in a conversation with someone, and that conversation is important to you. And them trying to pull on your pants, asking you, can we go to Dairy Queen for lunch, is not an important matter. Was it urgent? It was to them. And when they keep pulling, why do kids do that?
He's not talking about me, by the way.
Dad.
You did on Sunday, didn't you?
Right.
Dad, 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 Dad. What? My case is rested. Non-project emergencies also create a situation of urgency, but not important.
Non-project emergency.
Non-project emergencies.
What does that mean?
Well, if something comes up as an emergency, but it's not a part of the project that necessarily has to be done that you're working on, but it comes up, and for example, I don't know if you guys have PCs. I don't know if your deal says you got mail or if mine just dings. I was upstairs getting ready for class and going through the PowerPoint and reviewing my notes, and I heard ding. Guess what I did? Check my email. Now, it was in regards to an email that someone had sent me that maybe it was an emergency, maybe it wasn't an emergency, but it was something that needed to be addressed. And so I took time from that. It wasn't a part of the project. It wasn't anything that I needed to be working on immediately. Couldn't have answered later. Well, that's one of those areas. Urgent, not important. And then the final area in this is many popular activities. You can list out a lot of stuff in this category, and it depends on the individual as to what is urgent to them, but what's not really important. But this last category, the last quadrant, and as you can see how we're moving through this, the last quadrant of non-urgent and non-important areas involve the trivia and the busy work of life. And you guys can list a lot of stuff into this category, but really when you think about it, it's not urgent, it's not important. As well, you can add areas that deal with gossip, idle speculation. Have you ever had those conversations in your mind or with someone else about something that if this happens, then I'm going to do this? I just get tickled every time, and I get consumed with that. Somebody will come up and tell me something, and for the next 2 hours I'm going through in my mind a scenario of what am I going to say if this happens? Man, that is just idle speculation. And most of the time it never happens. Non-urgent, not important. Also, pointless web surfing. Need I say any more?
Not for my benefit.
I mean, really. Have you ever gone anywhere without your phone? That's just apart from you, Nathan House.
You're sure all the time.
You're the anomaly here in this group. But I mean, really, have you ever gone somewhere and forgot to take your phone with you?
It drives you crazy.
5 minutes on the road, then turn around.
But I mean, do you ever find yourself, do you ever feel like your hip's buzzing when
Yeah.
your phone is not buzzing?
Yeah.
I mean, Pavlov's theory really works. You know, it's really true. Anything that wiggles, squirts, or moves can be trained. We're in that category. I mean, how many times do we find ourselves, I'm just sitting at the airport. Let me pull out my phone and let me get over here on Facebook and just see exactly what's going on in the world. I think what I'll do is check my email. So I click on my email, and I'm just kind of surfing around here. Is it important? No. Urgent? No. It's just a matter of pointless web surfing. I think I'm going to look up.
Hold his hands.
I know the net worth of most people in Hollywood, and I don't know why.
That would fall under trivia. That is worthless information.
I was gonna say, I heard a joke that Jerry Seinfeld had told back a while ago, and it was the fact that your comfort level goes down as the battery on your phone goes down. Like, if there's not a charger inside or something, like, you start thinking about it and you can't.
I don't know how many times I've seen people almost literally fight to get a plug-in at a power station in an airport so that they can plug their phone in. It just cracks me up.
People carrying power strips to the airport just so that they can share one outlet.
See
I hadn't thought about doing that.
on the floor, in front of the bathroom, anywhere,
Yeah,
everywhere.
I've seen it in a lot of different airports.
Our anniversary was a few weeks ago. We got to go to Cirque du Soleil, and we got these amazing tickets for really good price. I usually sit on my phone whenever I'm driving, so I can make sure I feel it vibrate or whatever. I'm crazy about my phone, and you know that.
Yes.
Anyway, when I got up to go in, I left it in the seat, and we got inside. Oh no, that's not good. It's like the lights are coming down, and I thought, you know, that's fine, not a big. And Rudy was like, "Are you gonna be okay?" And it was funny. It was so dramatic, but I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." But I couldn't even enjoy Cirque du Soleil. I was like, the next intermission, I ran out and I said, "I need to run out to my car real quick." And the lady was like, "Is it an emergency?" And I was like,
Yes.
"Sort of."
Was it urgent?
They said, "Well, we don't allow re-entry, so if you go out, you can't come back in." And so literally, it probably ruined the show for me. It was an amazing show, and they're doing flips over our heads and stuff. And I'm thinking, do I have any emails or what? Like, I have that important of a life, but literally, it made me sick to have it in the car.
Pointless web surfing.
Ugh.
And then time wasters. I have to literally force myself to go sit down and watch television with Cheryl.
That's true.
Just because I know the time is important to her. And if any of you tell her that, I will deny it.
You're like, can't you find something you like doing? Like,
But
Right, my
right,
thesis.
recorded for all of history. But my thing is, television is the greatest waste of time on the planet. I could be doing so many more things, more productive. See, this comes back to our study earlier, talking about patience. But why is that? Why do we have this mentality that we will sit, I mean, if I'm going to waste my time, let me go do it in something that's going to be like observing creation. Go and sit at Lookout Mountain and just observe the beauty of the scenery or something. But to do something that just wastes time. Now, it's never a waste of time to spend time with Shirley, ever. But sitting in front of a television, guys, do you know that the average person spends 29 and a half hours a week in front of television? The average person. Guess who's influencing our world the most? Hollywood. It's not the Bible. Most people, the average, is less than 2% of all religious people that are daily Bible readers.
Of religious people?
Of religious people. And so they'll spend 29 and a half hours watching television that won't read their Bible every day. And most people have this mindset that they get all they need when they go to the worship service, and then the majority of them are going to say when they leave, I got nothing out of it. And it's because they've been so shaped by the television. I can tell you what day of week it is by what's on television. It's interesting what's happening in our culture and why. And we're leading in this culture. So how do we change it? How do we start with ourselves to make sure that we are prioritizing our lives? Because, guys, you and I both know that the majority of people are spending their time in this fourth quadrant, in areas that are not urgent and they are not important. God has given us this gift of time. He's given us so many different abilities and talents. And where are we spending it? On matters that are urgent, matters that are important, or in just the opposite quadrant?
Reminds me of the parable of the talents.
Yes.
If we belong to God, our time belongs to Him too. So He is going to ask us how we spent our time.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Let's talk about priorities for just a few moments as we come out of this idea of this quadrant mindset of what we determine to be urgent versus what is important. There are specifically three areas that I want us to think about in regards to priorities. And the first is accountability. Everyone is accountable to someone. I don't know if you've ever seen this book or not. I would urge you to get it. It's kind of interesting book. It's called QBQ. John G. Miller is the author of this book. He actually has a blog and a website that you can go to. Practicing Personal Accountability at Work and in Life. It's literally the QBQ is the question behind the question. What to really ask yourself to eliminate blame, complaining, and procrastination. I would recommend this book, guys. You can read it in about an hour and a half. It's a quick read. And yet it is very interesting. Have you ever heard questions like these? Why do we have to go through all this change? When is somebody going to train me? Who dropped the ball? When is that department going to do its job right? Who's going to solve the problem? When are they going to tell us what's going on? The idea of accountability, especially in the areas of leadership, is something that is very significant because we live in a culture and we live in a time that does not want to accept personal accountability. We do not want to give an account for our actions. And children learn it very young. Who broke this lamp? Wasn't me. I didn't do it. We don't want to stand up and say, I did that. We want to blame someone else. And really, it's been around a while. I think if we go back to Genesis chapter 3, we're going to find the same thing. He didn't want to take accountability for his actions. What have you done? The woman you gave me of the fruit, and I ate. The serpent tempted me. And it's been happening ever since. Nathan?
Well, you had said that this is a problem in our culture. And I was just going to make a comment you just did. I was like, well, I mean, I don't know that it's a culture problem or a human problem. You see this, and then you see Aaron say, you know what, I didn't do it. These people, and Moses, the problem has been around ever since man has existed. So, I mean, I wasn't trying to be disagreeable, but I was just going to say, I think it goes to the nature of just who we are. We don't want to take blame or get in trouble, and so we pass it on.
Yeah. We do not like to be in trouble.
You're going to say this or not, but you said we're all accountable to someone. As leaders, we're all accountable for someone as well.
Ooh, I hadn't thought of that, but that's very good. So how are we going to give an account for the people who have been entrusted to us? Family? Community? Church? We have an accountability. And obviously, Scripture teaches us that we're going to give an account in numerous different places. And a good place to start with that is 2 Corinthians 5, verse 10. I mean, we're all going to give an account for the deeds that we have done in the flesh, whether good or bad. And so, because of that, we know that we're going to give an account to God, and we need to be ready to do so. So accountability is something very important. Who am I personally accountable to? And as Rob says, who am I accountable for? We need to realize that when it comes to priorities, we have to answer those questions if we are going to prioritize our lives properly. A second area that goes along with this is strengths. Now, this is not the normal thinking. We need to spend 80% of our time working on our strengths, not our weaknesses. And generally, the mindset is just the opposite. Well, if I've got an area that's weak, I need to spend my time working on that weakness so that I can improve it. And I may improve it, but what happens to my strengths if I'm giving 80% of my time to my weaknesses and only 20% to my strengths? What happens to my strengths? They get weaker. I mean, it's just going to be a flop. It's what's going to happen, a flip-flop, and all of a sudden my weaknesses are going to become strong and my strengths are going to become weak. The idea in leadership is spend 80% of your time working on your strengths and surround yourself with people who are strong in the areas of your weaknesses.
Do you do that with the other 20%? Is that what you're saying? Or just in general?
Just in general. Surround yourself with those people, and that way you can spend a little time in working on those strengths, but it's not the priority in your life. Priority needs to be keeping your strengths strong and growing so that you continue to utilize those abilities that God has given you in the way that's going to lead as He wants you to. And then the third category is motivation. I appreciated the lesson last night talking about preparation and motivation and determination from Hebrews chapter 12. It's a great text of Scripture. But when I think about motivation, what is it that lights your fire? Do you have people in your life that are fire lighters? People that you can go to that are going to motivate you. That you know that this individual, they just light your fire. I mean, they have a way of saying things or doing things that they just get you fired up. When Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1, don't you find it interesting? He says, kindle afresh the gift that God has given you through the laying on of my hands. And then he goes on to tell him, God did not give us a spirit of timidity or fear, but of love and power and discipline. I want somebody like Paul. Now that's a fire lighter. Well, we need those Pauls in our life. Individuals that we can send an email to, or people that we can call on the phone, or people that we can go have lunch with, that they're going to light our fire. They're going to get us motivated to doing what we need to be doing. Because if we don't have those people in our life, it's very hard to be self-motivated. Now, it may not be an individual. It may be an activity. It may be just setting aside an hour or two of your day to read a book that really gets you going. And I tell you, for me, one of the books in my life that is a great motivation is this one that I require in this class. I'm loving reading it again now more than I did the first time for the class that I took earlier in the year. And I intend to read it every year with the class as we go through it. Because each time I'm reading it, it's more convicting, and it's helping me to see some of the application that we need to be involved in as leaders in demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit toward others. So it may be a book, or it just may be a movie. Could be songs, poems. I mean, there are some movies for me that when I watch them, I mean, it's like, yes!
The Ten Commandments.
I mean, whatever it is, you got to have that time in your life for someone to keep you motivated in what you're doing. I want us to talk for just a few moments about developing the right priorities.
Well, I was going to say, in return to you on the motivation thing, if we surround ourselves with people like that, we can't help but learn how to motivate.
That's right. I mean, how many people in our world make a living by being motivational speakers? I mean, you hear that term used all the time. We're going to bring in a motivational speaker. Why? Because he lights people's fire. He gets people motivated and excited to do what they need to be doing. Well, we need that in our life. So, developing the right priorities. There are several areas here. You need to remember that activity is not equivalent to achievement. You may be doing a lot of stuff, but you may not be achieving anything. That's very possible. You may just be busy, doing busy work, and never getting anywhere. I mean, I can burn a lot of energy walking in circles, but I don't get anywhere, and I haven't achieved anything. So when it comes to priorities, don't think that because you're busy, you're active, that you're achieving what needs to be done. So you have to be able to determine what it is that you need to achieve in order to arrange your priorities properly.
Where is the /Drew equal sign?
Yeah.
Oh, I made that.
Oh, what?
It's on here.
I made it.
You make it?
I did.
Okay.
I just took a line and put an equal sign up there and put it through it.
How do we do that?
You have a feature on your deal there that has you do a line, and I just turned it diagonally and put it over the equal sign.
We'll parlay later, Dad. I don't like that.
It's in your.
A second area that will help us in developing the right priorities is help others reach their potential. I hope that if you learn nothing else in this class on leadership, that what you will take from your time in this class is that your life is about helping others reach their potential. If you do that, you are achieving your potential. As a leader, the greatest thing that you can do is help others achieve the potential in their life. To me, that's what leadership is all about. And I hope that in part this class is doing that for you, to help you learn ways that will move you to reach your potential as preachers, as teachers, as an influence in the lives of others, but helping others reach their potential. And then, third is a self-examination. One of the most challenging areas of leadership is being able to examine yourself, and to examine yourself in such a way that you ask those kind of questions that are difficult sometimes to answer regarding your priorities and what is most important in your life. And you might be surprised if you ever ask someone that's close to you that knows you very well what they see as being the priority in your life. Might not like the answer, but a self-examination can help us in determining the idea of accountability and the idea of what it is that helps to motivate us and so on. And then write out the application to those three areas that we talked about. and really categorize them in areas of God, family, church, personal. I mean, we know the old acrostic of joy, Jesus first, others second, yourself last. But really, we need to write out some application to those areas of our strengths, accountability, motivation, so that we know what those areas are that will really help us when it comes to developing the right priorities. When you think about the area of our strengths, what is your strength? Is your strength spiritual or is it physical? I can bench press 250 pounds. Couldn't tell you the first passage in Scripture. I'll go to the gym and I'll spend an hour and a half every day working out. But I'm not going to sit down and memorize anything out of God's Word. Well, where are our strengths? Who are we accountable to? Accountable to God? Accountable to someone in your family? Who is it that we're accountable to? And what is it that motivates us? Nathan? Yeah,
I was just wanting to see if I understood the write out application part. I guess I'm a little confused at it. You're saying that you should write out the things you're talking about here.
Yes.
You write out your priorities, write out what your strengths are, write out who we're accountable
Yes.
to. Okay.
Yep. So write those things down on a piece of paper for yourself, not for me. I was talking with a couple last night that are struggling with some different areas, and it was interesting in talking to them. I finally asked, they're wanting to get married in the future, and he's wanting to go one direction. She's kind of wanting to wait before they go in that direction, and really I'm not sure she wants to go in that direction. And so I finally just said, look, I'm going to ask you some questions that are very hard for you to answer. And I'm not asking for you to give me an answer. I'm saying you need to write down the answers for yourself. But I said, first and foremost, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to do mission work? And I said, and if your answer is yes, I want to do mission work, why? She said, well, I'm not good at answering that question. I said, well, you need to get good at it, because if you don't know why you want to do this, maybe deep down you really don't want to, and that's the problem. So write out the application. And when we learn to do that, it will help us in developing the right priorities in our life. Now, I want to go through very quickly developing a to-do list. Now, I know you guys probably are involved in this kind of activity as you schedule out for the quarter when certain assignments are due and how much time you need to spend each day doing certain activities or certain assignments. But let me share with you just a few simple concepts to take with you about not only why you need to have a to-do list, but how to write out a to-do list that will benefit you. Number one, you need to prioritize what's most important that needs to be done the next day. I know it's been about a year ago now, but it happens frequently with me. I get overwhelmed with how much stuff that I've got to get done. Extension program, taking class, teaching a class, speaking engagements. There are a lot of different things going on, lessons I need to have written. And there are times it's almost like I do nothing because I've got so much to do, I don't even know where to start. And I had a good friend of mine that said, what do you have to get done tomorrow? Well, when you prioritize a to-do list and you're able to say, okay, what has to be done tomorrow or today for that matter, it will help you in what you need to do in writing out a to-do list. Secondly, consider next actions. Okay, I know what I've got to get done today, but what's coming next? So you start working on thinking about what's next in the list of areas that you need to do. You're prioritizing. You know what's got to be first, but what's next? And so that's kind of helping you to list out those areas of what's next action. Don't just start writing down a whole hodgepodge of different areas. Well, I need to do this sometime tomorrow. I need to do this sometime tomorrow. No, what's first and then what's next? And that way you're not working on something that at the end of the day you're thinking, man, I wish I hadn't done that. I should have been working on this. So what's next? And then third, in your to-do list, prepare the night before. Prepare your to-do list the night before. So as you think about this evening, when you get ready to go to bed, what do I need to get done tomorrow? What's first? What's next? After that? So prepare it the night before. Now, what goes with this is the next morning, you need to review it first thing. Because sometimes, after you've had a chance to sleep on it, your priorities tend to change a little bit. You may get up the next morning and think, wait a minute, I forgot all about. So review it the next morning. Make sure, okay, I've got everything where it needs to be. This is first, this is second, and so on. But not only do you need to review it first thing, but stay focused during the day. We talked earlier about distractions that can so easily get us off track of what needs to be done. So as you make a to-do list and you start working on it during the day, stay focused. Because when you check those things off, at the end of the day, when you look back and review it, you're going to see and have a sense of accomplishment, and it will help you in managing your time much better during the day. Add as items occur. Now, what I mean by that is someone's going to come up to you, and as you're thinking about those 4 quadrants, urgent, not urgent, but important, and so on. As you're thinking about those various quadrants of how you develop the priorities in your life, remember that when someone comes up and says, I need you to do this, okay, I've already got a list of areas that I need to do today. Add items as they occur for tomorrow. Don't start saying, okay, I can put this aside now, I need to work on this. Unless, obviously, it's an emergency and it becomes a crisis, and that's a different matter. But only add items as they occur. Don't be just, well, let's see. What do I need to do? And then rinse and repeat. The idea is at the end of the day, you do the same thing again. You go through your list of what you were able to accomplish during the day, and it helps you to have a sense of, okay, I'm getting somewhere. I'm reaching my goals. I'm achieving what needs to be done. My priorities are being met, and so on. And so then you set your to-do list for the next day. Now, I know you guys probably think, I don't need to do that. Because I've gone both directions with this. There have been times in my life where I don't have a to-do list, and then there are times I have a to-do list, and generally every year when I start teaching this material, I go back to it. But here's the reason why a to-do list is so important. When you write out what you need to accomplish the next day, and you stay focused on those, you're going to find that it doesn't take as much time to accomplish your work as if you just fly by the seat of your pants. As if you're just saying, well, I've got a bunch of stuff I need to get done tomorrow. Like what? Cheryl asks me that all the time. What are you going to be doing tomorrow? Well, if I don't have a list to tell her, she will find something for me to do with my time. But that's not the reason. I mean, you're going to see that you actually have time to work on some other areas at the end of the day that you want to do because you've accomplished what you had to do, the priority for them.
I am huge on lists to the point where it becomes burdensome. So one thing that they teach you to do, which is a good thing for me to do, is to say you need to limit yourself to the amount of things on your list. And then when you prioritize them, some of them just take bigger chunks of time, or
Yes.
whatever. So if you'll make a number that works with you, say 7, say that's it for this day. If I'm done at 2 in the afternoon, then you go do bonus stuff, and that feels like you're getting ahead.
Yes.
But don't have that list go from 8 to 30, and when you get 28 of them done, you feel bad because you didn't get the other 2 done.
Yeah.
So that was something that
Good.
I learned from that, just from a personal perspective.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
For you, if this is, I guess you do this regularly, and this is how you, I guess you base your productivity for the day and everything, would you actually make one of the items, starting out, let's say, if you're not a big list maker, make the last thing, make a to-do list for tomorrow, or is that silly?
Well, a lot of things become a habit, but until they become a habit, I list them off until they become a habit.
Okay.
But there are certain things that I've done now, I don't want to get off on something else, but I categorize a lot of things like spiritual, and then mental, and then physical. And I have those 3 big categories, and I have one thing in there that I'm going to do that day. And if it's what kind of workout I'm going to do, and I know what kind of workout and how long it's going to take. If it's what I'm studying, because I'm studying with Panad over in Cambodia, I know what I need to do for that, and I set a time. So I have some big categories, but then I may have some that I'm starting as a routine. But I always know at the end of the day that tomorrow's coming, you know, it has been forever, so I have my list kind of sketched out. But I have them in big chunks, so I don't feel like I've got a list of 40 things.
Okay.
I really only feel like I have a list of 7 things. And if I get one thing accomplished spiritually, then I have done well in that category for me today. And I feel good about that. I don't have to feel, and so on and so forth. And then the non-essential items, those are kind of my, do I have time left over in the day? And then I start whipping those off, and those make me feel good. But if I've done 30 things that day, and I had 32 on my list, I feel kind of bad because I'm like, man, I'm behind. And that's the mentality you need to get away from.
Yeah. So on your I like that idea. I think I'll probably implement that. But on your itemized things for spiritual and physical and mental, are you setting time restrictions? I know that's funny after what we've talked about today, but to help you stay on track, are you putting study Nehemiah for an hour today? Or?
Yes, I do that because I don't have enough discipline to say I can just do this forever. And I find that I'm getting up earlier and earlier in the mornings to get some of this stuff accomplished, and I'm going to bed earlier, and so you'll have some big adjustments like that, but yes, definitely.
Yeah. Very good. I tell you guys, it'll make a huge difference, not only in doing your schoolwork here, but in your ministry. Now, one of the areas you'll talk about later on is keeping a log. So when you have a to-do list like that and a daily planner, and you keep a log, you can always submit. When someone comes up to you in the congregation and says, what do you do with your time? Well, let me show you. And you can give them a list. But if you say, well, I do this and I do this, and they're like, well, I never see you at the office. I mean, I think preachers only work 2 hours a week. And you guys are going to get that. And so you need to be able to show your leadership, elders, whoever it is, be able to show them a list of areas that say, okay, this is what I do with my day. I set aside this time here for this, and I've done this, and I've done this, I do so much time for visiting, and whatever it is. But that way you're giving account. And see, that's the priorities that we're talking about, is being able to give accountability and know what your strengths are and what motivates you so that you can do that. So a to-do list will be very helpful in regards to that.
Are you suggesting keep a log now?
I think it'd be great for you to be able to do that. It will help you develop a discipline now that will help you in ministry later. But secondly, it will give you a good perspective of when you look back over your day, just what you did accomplish. So it'll benefit you now to start that practice.
I know sometimes we can get frustrated at those things that we feel are important, but they're not urgent. If they're on our to-do list 2 or 3 days in a row. When I used to drive into work, I would think mentally, all right, I would plan out, this is what I'm going to do with my day. And then the crisis du jour would come up, and you would spend the majority of your time. And you have to realize that part of your job is in dealing with those crises that arise. And so you may not get to something on your to-do list that to you is important, but it's not urgent. And we can't be frustrated, because it's really easy to be frustrated when 2 or 3 days in a row you've still got that same thing on your to-do list, because there are other things that took precedence.
Yeah. And that's why keeping a log of what you do every day will help with that. Because if you're able to look back and realize that you end up spending 4 hours on a crisis situation, and even though you didn't get to everything on your to-do list, you're able to see why. And that helps you in planning accordingly for other areas in the days ahead. So it's very important to keep that log of not just a to-do list. And don't just write it on a piece of paper that you're going to throw away. But at the end of the day, is probably the best time as you look back over your to-do list to start writing out how much time you spent on those various areas so that you're able to keep and give an account for that. The last area that we're going to be looking at that defines our leadership is called the principle of the hand. The principle of the hand ties in to a text in the book of 2 Timothy, and it really begins at the end of 1 Timothy. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, in verse 20, we find a very unique word. Paul tells Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to you. Now, when you get into 2 Timothy, he's going to reiterate this idea. And what's interesting is that when you look at the text, And you see that as you read through chapter 1 of 2 Timothy, he's going to use this term entrust again. And he's going to tell Timothy in verse 12, I know whom I have believed. And I am convinced he's able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day. And then the verse that we use basically as a theme verse for the school here in 2 Timothy 2, verse 2, the things that you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, these entrust to faithful men who will teach others also. That word entrust is a very special word, because literally the idea of that word has to do with placing into the hand of someone else. So Paul's telling Timothy, I want you to guard what has been placed into your hands, because he knew that Christ was able to guard what he had placed in his hands. And the beauty of this is that in 2 Timothy 2, verse 2, where he talks about placing into the hands of those who are faithful, who will teach others also. The common term that we find in leadership to this principle is the idea of empowerment. We're empowering others. We're placing into their hands responsibilities and tasks that need to be accomplished. It's a matter of trust. And really, there are 5 words that I think are very important for us to remember in connection to this principle of the hand. The first is responsibility. When we entrust something to someone else, when we place it into their hands, there's an element of responsibility that goes with that. And when people know that they have that responsibility, it heightens their approach to leading. Now, I want you to think about it from the standpoint of how I've often heard responsibility defined, and that is ability plus opportunity equals responsibility. And so what we're trying to do as leaders in empowering others through this principle of the hand is we're trying to be able to recognize the abilities of others and give them the opportunity to act upon that. And that's what responsibility is all about. Second word is accountability. Never give someone a responsibility without holding them accountable. Because if people feel that they're not going to be held accountable for what you've entrusted to them, then guess what they're going to do with it? Nothing. I mean, if there was no accountability system for all the assignments that we give you and all of the classes that you take here, how many of them would you do? 0. You don't have to turn them in. You're not going to get a grade for them. Don't worry about the test. We're not going to count the scores. We just want you to get the information. We're not going to hold you accountable for it. Well, what would you do? Nothing. So don't give people a responsibility without holding them accountable. You may have to put into some type of periodical evaluation so that you're able to hold them accountable for what they're doing with the responsibility that you've given them. A third word, and this is a very important one in regards to this, is stewardship. Rajiv made reference earlier to the parable of the talents from Matthew chapter 25. And I'm telling you guys, this is about stewardship. Master goes on a journey. Well, he is placing into the hands of 3 servants. 1 5 talents of money, 1 2 talents of money, and to a third 1 talent of money. Now guess what? He is entrusting them according to their abilities. So he has given them a responsibility. When he returns, he holds them accountable for what they've done with what they've been given. And they're going to answer for their stewardship. And we need to recognize that we are stewards of far more than just our money. We're going to give an account of the stewardship of our time, of the talent, the abilities that God has given us, our families as fathers and husbands, and the stewardship of God's Word. We sing that song, "Into our hands the gospel is given." Into our hands is given the light. Haste, let us carry God's precious message, leading the erring back to the right. I couldn't help but think last night we were singing, to the work, we are servants of God. And we don't sing that song to each other. We sing it to the book. I looked around, a few were. But are we really encouraging each other? And do we recognize the words of that song and what we're committing to? Stewardship. Principle of the hand is about stewardship. It's also about trust. It's about trust. And we've talked before about the importance of trust. Can God trust us? Can He trust us to be good stewards? And when we're empowering others, there needs to be a relationship of trust. You need to be able to trust the individual that you're giving responsibilities to, that they're going to do the task and they're going to do it to the best of their ability. You hold them accountable to that so they can demonstrate good stewardship. And it increases the level of trust. To whom much is given, more shall be given. And that's really what we learned from the parable of the talents. The one who had the 1 talent who did nothing, it was taken away from him, and it was given to the one who had 10. Interesting thought, isn't it? It's because he proved himself trustworthy, and so he was given more. And that's a great way to learn in leadership who you can really groom to be leaders in other areas by their stewardship. And then the 5th word is empowerment. Now I'm going to share some ideas with you here very quickly that continues on with this idea of empowerment, the principle of the hand. And what we're really dealing with is how to help others reach their potential, because that's what this is really all about, helping others succeed. Now we'll talk in just a moment about some barriers to that, but helping others be successful. How do we do that? Well, there are a couple of ideas I share with you. Number one, you need to be on their side. People need to know that you are on their side, that you're working for them. You're trying to help them reach their potential and be successful in life, spiritually and otherwise.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. So we're still talking about the whole idea here of the principle of the hand, and specifically empowerment is what you're referring to here.
Well, this is kind of, it flows from that, but this is another part of that principle of the hand. The first had to do with the 5 words that deal with the principle of the hand. And this is kind of the second section of that principle of the hand, and that's helping others succeed. And in order to help others succeed, you need to be on their side. They need to know that you're going to be their huckleberry. Now, I'd never heard that phrase until a few years back when I was having some struggles in the congregation at Greenbrier. And this guy came in and sat down with me, and he was giving me some advice to help me. And he said, I want you to know, I will always be your huckleberry.
Amen.
He said, now I'm going to tell you things that you're not going to want to hear and that you need to change. But you can rest assured I will always be your huckleberry. I knew that no matter what happened, he was always going to stand up for me. He would be there for me. And that's the idea behind that. We need to let people know that when we have empowered them, when we've entrusted them, that we've seen that stewardship in them and that we trust them to do this job. We're going to hold them accountable for it. We've empowered them to do it. Now we're going to help them succeed. And the way that we do that is letting them know, I've got your back. Whatever goes down, you can rest assured I'll be there. We're not going to be the hireling that flees when the wolf comes. We're going to be the shepherd that stands there to defend the sheep. A second area that we need to move along pretty quick unless it's important.
I'm just curious on, let's say you have their back and they're in the wrong.
Different matter.
Okay.
That's the matter you take care of with them personally first before you ever get to that. But also you need to encourage them. And when you're talking about helping others succeed, you really cannot underestimate the value of encouragement. You take a child, for example, and when you know that you want them to achieve a certain thing, if you encourage them, it's like putting gasoline on a fire. They want to do more because they've seen that what they've done has been good, and you've encouraged them, so they'll do more. It's no different for us as adults. Don't underestimate the importance and the power of a pat on the back. You've done a good job. Man, I appreciate what you're doing because it's excellent work. You tell a song leader, you did a great job. You tell a preacher that he preached a great lesson. That was one of the best lessons I've heard you preach. I was so encouraged by that. You're going to keep them motivated. That's a fire lighter. You need to be that to help others succeed. A third area in regards to this is help them set goals. Now, we're going to talk later on in a few weeks about goals and how to set goals, because generally we have this mindset of wishes. Well, what I'd like to do, we need to know what a goal is and how to set SMART goals. We'll talk about that. Most of you probably already familiar with it. But when you help others set goals for their life, you're going to help them succeed, because now they're going to have a purpose for what they're trying to achieve. And so as you're encouraging them and helping them set goals, then you give them the authority. You're not going to stand over them and micromanage every breath they take. Give them the authority, step back, and let them do their job. Now, again, you hold them accountable. You're going to ask them certain questions at certain times, and they're going to give a response in regards to what they've been doing. But I tell you, they work a lot better when you give them that authority to be able to do their job and not micromanage every breath. And then provide them the support they need, the tools they need to achieve the task that you've given them. This is one of the most important areas of helping others succeed. You can give them a job. You can trust them to do the job, give them the authority to do the job. But if you don't provide them with the tools they need to do it, they're not going to succeed. Give them what they need to help them be successful. Brad?
Included in this, I would add tools and training if necessary.
Yes, very much so. Very good. Yeah, it's certainly difficult to expect them to do a job that you don't help prepare them for and train them to do. Very good thought. Let me just run through these last couple areas just real quick for you guys. The question that came up, what if they fail? You're trying to help them succeed. You gave them a task. What if they fail? You got a choice. You can shut them down to where they never do anything else, or you can come in and you can say, okay, what do we need to do to get this back on track or get you moving in a different direction? It may be that this was not your skill set, but we've got other areas we need you involved in. But the last thing you want them to do is to walk away thinking that they're a failure. The only time the person fails is if they quit. And so just make sure that if they do not succeed at the project that you've given them, you've got to, maybe that you need to examine yourself and what you've done in approaching that particular situation and whether you've helped them to succeed. Then, just real quickly, I want to talk about a few barriers to this. For a leader, it's really challenging to try to help someone achieve that, to achieve success in their own life. And one of the number one reasons for that is because people are afraid of losing their own job. Well, if I make all of you leaders and I teach you how to teach what I'm teaching, well, then you're going to have my job. I used to get tickled. I'd have people come out the back when somebody, like one of the young people at the congregation at Greenbrier, would get up and they'd preach a sermon, and somebody come out the back and they'd say, better be careful. He's going to have your job. I said, he can have it. That's the whole point. You see, the only way we really become indispensable is when we are dispensable. We've made ourselves so dispensable by training others who can do the job that people are going to think, we can't get rid of him. He's training everybody else to do the work. You see, don't let the fear of losing your job become a barrier to entrusting others. Then the fear of change. When you give people authority and you allow them to start doing their jobs in their areas and using their own creativity, it's going to bring some change. Change is not a bad thing. It's biblical. Obviously, we're not talking about going away from biblical doctrine, but we're talking about there may need to be some change. Don't fear change unless it is unscriptural. Another barrier to entrusting others when it comes to this, and this is the final one, is low self-esteem. People have a tendency to think of themselves as being pretty worthless. Think about the Moses situation. I'm going to send you back. Lord, I've never been eloquent of speech. Who am I going to tell him sent me? Send whoever you will. The list went on and on. We have a tendency oftentimes to not see ourselves as being leaders. And if we're not careful, we allow this barrier to hinder us from doing what we need to empower others. But sadly, when we're empowering others and trusting them to do the work, the same thing happens. So just make sure we work to overcome some of those areas. I didn't know I had more. I'm trusting others. What is this? Oh. This is the last piece right here. You need to believe in people. Yes, there are going to be times when people will discourage you, and there are going to be times when people let you down. But guys, we do the same thing. We've got to believe in people. If we really want to see people grow into being leaders, then we need to believe in them. How many of you out here ever seen Count of Monte Cristo? There's a scene in there where the priest is about to die. And he's telling the guy who becomes the Count of Monte Cristo, he's telling him where the map is. And he says, don't use it for vengeance. And he's making a reference to God, and this guy says, I don't believe in God. And he says, it's okay. He believes in you. And I thought, it's interesting to think about the fact that God has entrusted us. As full of the frailties and problems and sin that we are, God has entrusted us with the precious message of Jesus. And it's because He believes in us. And I'm telling you, when we believe in people, we're going to accomplish the same thing. Great stuff. Okay, guys, let me shut this thing down.